Okay, so the recording is on now. So I'd like to welcome you to the UN CEFACT Global Trust Registry project. This is the second kickoff, which I know is almost like a tautology. How can you have a second kickoff? But it's to do with time zones and trying to accommodate different time zones and people. This is the time zone we hope works for the US and Canada and other parts of the world in that sort of time zone. So that's what we're doing. The first meeting kickoff we had was 17 hours ago. And at that meeting, we had the luxury, I suppose, of one of the secretariat of the UN CEFACT Bureau explaining how UN CEFACT works. So in a few minutes, I'll show you the slides they presented, but you will find on the recording of the 17 hours ago meeting, a lady called Camilla going through that with elegance, grace, and knowledge, neither of which can I achieve when I show you these slides. But I will at least show you kind of what she presented to us. My name is John Phillips. I'm one half of the leads of this project. My other co-lead and colleague on this project is Elena Nicagales. She's a staff member of the Registradores of Spain. That's a registrar in Spain that looks after business registrations, commercial assets, ships, boats, planes, land. Pretty well everything that needs to get registered in Spain is registered by registradores.org. And therefore, she comes with a whole body of knowledge, and she's also a lawyer, around the meaning of registration and what that means and from a jurisdictional point of view and so on. So she's awesome and essential, but can't make it now because I think it's some awful time in the morning in Spain. So I'm not expecting her to arrive. So it'll just be me going through this at the moment. I'm going to now share my screen and show you those slides I mentioned about Camilla. Because it's such a smaller group, I'm very much welcome. Just call out Anne and Tom if you want to sort of me to dwell on something or repeat something. Please don't be shy. Also, if you want to put things in the chat, to do that. I will flip to and fro to see the chat, but the chat gets recorded, so you'll so we can kind of go back to it. If there's a note you want me to look at later, I'll see it in the chat. So this is the deck that was presented by Camilla. She took about 20 minutes to go through this. I won't dwell too far because some of it is sort of not my specialization or knowledge. So the first thing to understand is the UN CEFACT is a part of, obviously, of the United Nations. It's a bureau. It's an office. It's all not for profit. So the people that you see in front of you on the screen are, in general terms, not paid employees of the United Nations. They're volunteers recognized as chairs and vice chairs and so on of the secretariat of the bureau for UN CEFACT. UN CEFACT is a part of the UN. It has to sit underneath one of the 5 regional economic commissions to actually have kind of authority. You need almost like a parent to look after you. So the parent for CEFACT is the European Commission, even though CEFACT's work is truly global. So it's truly global, but it happens to come underneath the European body. They do a number of things. I think probably the thing that might be common knowledge amongst the group of us here are things like EDIFACT. Once upon a time, EDIFACT, and still is, in fact, an important standard for trade document exchange, EDI. And that's part of the CEFACT's body of work and standards that they maintain. So is something called low code, LOCODE, not as in low or no code concepts with development programming, but to do with the country of origin kind of codes and things. So the 2 letter codes that we now associate with countries, that list is maintained by UN CEFACT. They publish a number of recommendations, and in particular on this slide, the recommendation number 49, which is the one in the middle of your slide, is probably the most important to kind of dwell on or look at. Recommendation 49 is one of the sustainability promoting kind of initiatives under the UN, and it stemmed from a realization that's common knowledge, really, that whilst whatever your opinion is of sustainable development goals, and you know, I'm a fan, the risk is if people are making false claims about what they're doing in sustainable development, if they're making false claims about greenhouse gas emissions or whatever else is part of this body of work, then those that are investing and doing things correctly will not get any benefit from doing so. because you can't tell the fact from the fiction. You can't tell the false claim from the true claim. So this concept, often called greenwashing, was causing concern that if greenwashing were to continue, we'd have what they're calling a race to the bottom, that there is no commercial or any other advantage in sort of doing what some people might think of as the right thing. So how do we combat that? So recommendation 49, which is going to be approved at the plenary in Geneva on the 2nd of July, it's already publicly available. You can see the draft, the document as it is. Won't change in content, but it's a sort of a draft until it gets formally approved, and you can read it. It's all about recommending to countries how they might combat greenwashing. And one of the initiatives in that recommendation is a thing called the United Nations Transparency Protocol, UNTP. And that protocol has been developed over the last 2 years. It's got a number of really quite interesting qualities to it. So this is trying to address transparency at scale for supply chains. And for those of us who've worked in this space, this is a well-trod path. Right, there have been lots of initiatives, many of them back in the day are associated with blockchain for obvious reasons, but it turns out quite challenging applications, because if you're trying to get the whole world and all of the suppliers to adopt a technology, it's very, very hard. They've already invested hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in existing IT infrastructure. They've got their own standards. To expect them to move on to something else is sort of academically interesting, but practically impossible. And therefore, the idea of a platform solution was deemed unlikely to succeed. So the United Nations Transparency Protocol is a protocol, not a platform. And it's a protocol in the sense of where I come from, mostly the fork goes on the left and the knife goes on the right. That's a protocol. And it's that kind of protocol. The idea being that in a supply chain, there are moments of kind of truth. There are points when a supplier produces a product and they send it on to a customer, and that should be associated in the UNTP terms with a digital product passport. And what UNTP is trying to do is to sort of identify the main sort of events and moments at which things should be recorded, and enable the issuers of these things to issue them as a verifiable credential, and to sign that verifiable credential to sort of make an attestation, a cryptographically protected attestation that we the issuer of this thing, declare that we've made this product that's got these qualities, and so on. Now you'll see a little later when I show my deck, there's a sort of 6 or so key credentials that UNTP picks up, but it's a protocol, not a platform. And one of the things it identified was the need for trustworthy digital identity anchors. And that's what this project, Global Trust Registry, is about. Thank you, Joe. Remarkable you can do that from the car. So a number of the impacts that we went through on, I mentioned low code and the business standard for trade. I won't, as I said, I won't dwell too far on these slides. There was a couple I want to pick up on as I go through. The walkthrough by Kamala is obviously very good. She knows this very well. So I'd encourage you to listen to the first 20 minutes of the previous kickoff. This is important. Open development process. Under any project of the United Nations CEFACT body, there are a number of sort of ways of working. And one of the ways of working is this idea of a thing called open development process. So any project that gets approved needs to sort of say how it's going to work according to the open development process. Inception is that point where we have a call for participation. Then you go through requirements gathering, draft development, public review, project exit means you finish the draft, you've published the final, but it's not yet published until the plenary approves it. So you kind of stop your work, but it gets approved and published at the plenary date. And then you go into a phase of maintenance. So this is the way a project proposal looks. If you've ever seen the brief for this project, the signed off brief, which was written in January of this year, you'll see this structure. And it's got dates that were relevant to January of this year. So I'll show you a little later how I think those should change. It goes through requirements gathering, draft development, a public review process, and then this thing called project exit, and then publication and so on. So after publication, you then go into a maintenance phase. That's one of the interesting things for this project. If this project is successful, and we obviously hope it will be, it'll create a mechanism by which registries that already exist, the registries of countries that publish things of note and interest for supply chains, can provide authentication to those that they have registered, such that those people or the organizations of people they've registered can prove, if you like, they've been registered in Spain or whatever other country in the world they've come from, and so on. Now, there's going to have to be a maintenance process for that. So if you're familiar with things like I mentioned, low code, that's one of those areas. We're probably all familiar with passport control and smart gate e-passports, and the ICAO organization that looks after that's part of the United Nations area as well. So if you've established something, you have to maintain it, and obviously that's what this slide is about. And this is more about the UN development process. Important point here: all United Nations member states can participate. So we will have significant involvement from India, it turns out, on this project later on. As part of that process, they'll need to get what's called a head of delegation for India to be part of the UN CEFACT group, so that the Indian head of delegation can approve contributors to the project, and that's going to happen. But any UN member state is eligible to participate, any country. I won't go through this slide. This is important, right? I don't know if Tom and Anne, if you've already registered or you're already experts, but there's a process where you can contribute to the project, actively contribute to the project. I encourage everybody to be active contributors. To do that, you need to fill out a form that triggers an email to your head of delegation. And that basically is saying, I want to kind of participate. These are my areas of expertise, and I want to participate in the project. And what you should have is a response in a few weeks' time, depending on how much load they're under, to sort of welcome you to the project. In the process of doing that, you're accepting the intellectual property rules and so on of the project and of the UN. I won't dwell on the Confluence pages. There's some dates of significance if you're into these plenary things. So the plenaries are going to be in Geneva coming up in a few weeks' time, where a number of things are there. They're the sort of administrative sort of processes. There's a forum that you can see there. That forum is actually more to do with the subject matter experts gathering together and sort of discussing the details of their work that they're doing. So that might be of more interest to those that are interested in that sort of part of the work, and that's going to be in Dakar. And that was the slides from Kamala. So I didn't do her justice in going through them as quickly as I did, but I do encourage you, if you want to listen to her talk through those slides, because there's a lot more detail that she can share and has shared. Any quick questions, Anne and Tom? Anything you kind of want me to repeat?
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, what are you registering? Are you registering import-export companies or the products?
Excellent point. And if you forgive me, but remember that, because I'm going to get to it on the next deck. But that's the very gist of this whole project is, what on earth are you going to register? How are you going to register it? It's exactly the point. So
does the U.S. participate?
Yeah. So I guess I want to, let's make it sort of simple, right? Irrespective of our kind of okay, this project holds to be true. I certainly hold to be true. Every country has the right to this sort of self-determination, decide what they want to do and how they want to do it, produce their own laws, have their own processes. That's the nature, if you like, of United Nations. But there are commonalities in every country, no matter what their feelings are towards the UN, in terms of, do they register companies, organizations as legal entities, and what sort of legal framework do they have for that process? Do they register plots of land, and who owns them? Do they register? So these are the sort of the elements that are of interest from a supply chain. When we're looking at a product, if we go from the raw materials through to the final product, where were the raw materials dug up? What was done to them in the process of producing a product? Who was the owner of the facility? What transport company was used? All these things are sort of the facts of supply chains. And those facts are interesting if you want to know with any certainty the provenance of any product. So irrespective of whether you're looking for sustainable development goal benefits or whether you're looking for confidence about where a product has come from, you kind of want to know more about the supply chain and confidence in the supply chain. And that's what this project is doing. So yes, the US is participating in individuals. There are several people that Tom, that are part of the project. So no order of precedence, but I'll do the 2Ds. Drummond Reed and Daryl O'Donnell are going to be participating in it. They're at Identiverse right now, and the big flying to
What was
Geneva.
the second name?
Daryl O'Donnell. Daryl is part of actually he's running IRA, which is an interesting global project on ecosystem trust, pan ecosystem, cross ecosystem trust network that they're trying to establish. So if you haven't looked at it, it's a very interesting body of work. Encourage you to have a look at it. Daryl's leading it. He's based in Canada. Drummond is based in the US, and there's a number of other US-based people that will be participating.
Yeah, Drummond just changed his job.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay.
I know. Yes.
I heard from Transmute.
Yes. So Transmute and companies
they're the
like
most likely people to help.
Yeah. So Transmute, Spherity, and others that are actively involved in supply chain software development and so on are already part of the United Nations Transparency Protocol.
Oh, good.
And people like Dr. Carstens Stocker from Europe are also keen to participate in this project. So whilst this is a small call, I have no doubt it'll grow in numbers of participants and so on as we go forward. So I'll show you the slides that explain a bit more about the project, and then we can talk to the point you're addressing, Tom. So the couple of things about this project is that if you're participating in it, there are codes of conduct. Probably the most important one about these is the fifth one, which I dwell on a bit further in the next slide, which is this is an open standards development project, which means that whatever we contribute to and create is royalty-free, no licenses, free to use. And that point is important and dwelled on in a document that's about the intellectual property rights process for UN CEFACT. These texts that I'm showing on this slide are part of cutout of the PDF or the documents that formally define IPR. They're all in our project folder, which is publicly available. They're also on the websites for UN CEFACT. So it's really important to sort of understand this is not about furthering commercial interests of any party. It's about making things publicly available. That project name caused a whole bunch of interesting conversations on LinkedIn. I don't know if you've seen them, but if you call yourself the Global Trust Registry, you're setting yourself up for some interesting conversations. I probably should have been slightly more focused, I suppose, when I was reviewing the brief that I was being asked to lead, because it does tend to mislead people about what we're trying to do. What we will do is we will recognize the existing efforts and work done by nation states about what they register, how they register it, what the legal infrastructure is, and so on. We want to sort of understand what they've got, and we want to help people find what they've got. So we're going to be looking at kind of trying to get an understanding of what exists. We're going to define, if we can, a way in which that what exists can be made available, both in terms of data and accessibility. We're going to have to understand define a governance process for that thinking. You know, how do we recognize and how do we make available? Joe.
Sorry, John. Are you showing some other slides? Because the only ones we're seeing is the last one in Camilla's.
Okay, yeah. I need to change the window. I thought I was doing the whole window. Yeah. Thank you very much.
No worries.
We're going to go back to present. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense now. Here we go. Let's do the entire screen, and that won't happen again. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now you should see it. Well done seeing that on your phone, Joe. Okay, so these are the sort of wills and won'ts of the project, and back to that project name idea. So we will have to look at the governance framework. We will have to think about the data structure that we're thinking about, and we're going to work with existing registries. We're not going to create a central registry of all things. We're not going to issue secondary credentials. We're not going to compete with existing frameworks like Glyph and other things that already exist. We're trying to sort of do an and we're also trying to enable nation states and the registrars that they have to publish their own thing. That's the kind of ethos. There's a bunch of deliverables that we're sort of duty bound to create and or to tweak if we need to tweak them and decide there's a better way to achieve the outcomes we want to achieve. So there are business requirement specifications on the digital identity anchor. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. The global trust register requirements, so how would we run the thing we're trying to create? And then there's a recommendation that we're going to write about how this might work. So we're going to write a recommendation to UN CEFACT that they're going to decide, and then that recommendation will be promoted to the countries of the UN to say, we recommend we do this. But in the meantime, we'll have created also materials for each registrar to independently, should they choose to do so, issue their own credentials, verifiable credentials about what they register and so on. So there's a sort of two-pronged thing happening here. This digital identity anchor, Anne, please.
I may jump ahead a little bit here, but isn't it then the target audience of these projects and all of these deliverables are not the wide public, but a very small subset of people in basically governments or responsible for creating these registries to implement it?
So for this project, yes, they're a critical audience, absolutely, stakeholder, whatever you want to call them as, absolutely. But in a sense, the demand side is the interesting one on this. They're the supply side. The demand side are the commercial interests that want to use UNTP. And in fact, the demand side is the UN's interest in transparency at scale for supply chains. So the ultimate goal we want to achieve is this idea of transparency at scale. For all sorts of reasons. The primary reason for the UN is Sustainable Development Goals. But even if you were looking to do country of origin sort of tests and whatever else you're interested in, tariffs or whatever, you need transparency. So there's a sort of a large number of really quite significant companies looking at implementing UNTP. When I say the companies, they're the participants in the supply chain. So not Transmutants Verity, who are building the products for this, but the actual companies. About a third of the world's GDP is already interested in the United Nations Transparency Protocol. But that protocol only works, no, it doesn't only work, is improved if there are reliable anchors for claims of identity and provenance. Right? So you're right. In this project, I need to get that's why Alina from Registradores in Spain is so critical to it, because she understands registrars and how they work and so on. We need to get them on board, but ultimately we kind of have an objective which is for all commercial and in fact consumer interests on supply chains. This structure here on the side of the screen that I'm looking at is a notional structure. It's not a sort of normative, definitive kind of structure. It's out of the specification for the UNTP project, but it gives you a sense of the kind of elements of data that we consider a digital identity anchor might have. Now that construct comes out of thinking about a supply chain process. So we look at a very, very simple supply chain where we've got one product manufacturer creating a product and a consumer looking at that product. The sort of logic, the thinking is the consumer needs a way to find out things about the product. So they'll scan a code, scan a QR code or barcode, whatever. That will resolve to information, a digital product passport, verifiable credential, which they can check for who signed it, has it been tampered with, all the usual things. And in that digital product passport, maybe other claims about a country of origin, company of origin. I am this company. So if I'm drinking a Spanish beer, was this beer actually made by a Spanish company? And to understand that, I will find there's an identifier. This company says it's from Spain. Or who says this company is from Spain? So now I need to go to an authority that recognizes companies in Spain and see if, in fact, that's the same company that it claims to be in this digital product passport. So it's that kind of logic about kind of going upstream, if you like, from where I am right now. So if I'm a consumer, I'm at the very end of the process, mostly at the end of the process, and I'm going back upstream to whatever level I need to satisfy my interest or confidence, whatever it is I'm trying to achieve. When we look at a richer supply chain, this is a electric vehicle, a battery kind of supply chain. Even though it looks more complicated, it's obviously a gross simplification of the reality, but it's somewhat more indicative. We can see we're going right the way from kind of mining through to recycling. And what UNTP is doing is saying there are moments of interest and truth that need to be kind of declared and recognized. And partly this is driven by existing trade regulations and requirements. If you want to sell a product into Europe, you will, by 2030, have to have a thing called a digital product passport. And you'll want to have evidence that backs up your claims in the digital product passport. So you kind of want to have, as best you can, the ability to prove what I'm saying is true because X, Y, Z. And the often we have regulations that require you to know more about upstream. You may want to know more about upstream because of commercial kind of confidence, risk mitigation, all sorts of stuff. But if we look at things like modern slavery regulations and so on, they tend to demand that you need to go all the way up to the very beginning of the supply chain to determine there is no modern slavery issue with your supply chain. So there's a number of different types of credentials you can see on this slide, from a digital conformity credential. That means that somebody has audited the facility or the company and found that they meet the requirements. You are, in fact, an organic farmer. You're not using pesticides and fertilizers beyond whatever level is considered for organic, and so on. So each of these types of credential is defined in the UNTP spec. But the fundamental one that interests us is this sort of identity piece. If I look at farming in Australia, and I'm rearing cattle for sale as meat into Europe, I need to be able to prove for Europeans that I haven't deforested the land upon which these cattle are reared. And that means I've got to identify the land itself. So what's the land register? I own this land. I own this cattle. I'm certified to be organic. All these things need to be proven if I'm going to make a digital product passport claim about the product at the far end to the Europeans. And that's the sort of thinking behind UNTP. Now, it kind of doesn't work, as I just said, unless you've got trustworthy identity anchors from authoritative registers. I said it doesn't work. Of course, it can work. You could say it works already, right? Commerce works already. We've got global supply chains. They're already working. And we live with, if you like, a degree of uncertainty and a degree of sort of risk in the claims that are made. You know, Joe and I have a little company called Cazoo. Cazoo is registered in Australia. It's got an Australian business number, ABN, and it's got an ABR, an Australian Business Register Entry or something. These two are very similar, but they're slightly different. And I can tell you what my ABN number is, but I'd like to be able to prove cryptographically that I own that, right? And that's the difference. We have this sort of loose kind of claim process at the moment in terms of paper and emails and PDFs and whatever else. And what we're trying to do is kind of make it more cryptographically resilient. This is where Alina and the Registradores of Spain and others become really important. So I mentioned authoritative registers. What's one of those? Well, they start from thinking about data inside a jurisdiction, inside some sort of legal framework that gives that data legal meaning, right? Sort of what does it mean to be a company in Spain, a company in Australia, or a company in Delaware? These are going to be somewhat similar, but different in terms of the regulatory demands and requirements. But the data doesn't just exist on its own, right? It has a whole body of things around it, including operations and services that are provided and governance about the operation itself, and they sit within a jurisdiction. It's given, typically, you'll find in the legislature of the country or state, the law that says such a registrar must exist. So you know, they typically have to be enshrined in law that they actually exist and they must do these things and they register these things. So this tends to have eventually a legal basis for authoritative registers. So that's something, if you like, that secondary credentials don't have. So Joe and I particularly are fans of a number of facets of the GLIFE, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Framework. But in a sense, you could say it's a secondary credential because the originating legal entities are those that are registered in the countries of origin. And what GLIFE is doing is kind of recognizing those and publishing a secondary credential, which makes it easier to use and do things. And it's actually required under European law for banking and a bunch of things. But it's sort of, it's not the primary. The primary is the country of origin. And that's what we're sort of looking at here for things that aren't handled by GLIFE and, in fact, enabling these registrars to publish firsthand. Most registrars in a country are part of a set of registrars in a country. And so the one jurisdiction may have a bunch of things that they look after. So in Australia, we'll have different registrars for assets of land, companies, and so on, and trademarks and whatever. And these have become useful, important things inside supply chains. So we are Global Trust Registry, this is finally to your question, Tom. We are interested in things that are interesting to supply chains in the first case. So businesses and organizations, are you registered in the country you claim to be? Land, is that land registered in that place that you claim it to come from? Facilities for mines and other types of operations, products and trademarks and so on. So these are the fundamental sort of elements that we're interested in from a registry point of view for this project to start with. I think of this project having three main phases. The first is sort of understand what exists. The second is to define what recognition, how might we recognize what exists. And the third is how might we guide implementation towards publishing what they have to make it accessible and verifiable and so on. That thinking is evident here. I'll show you how, but this is the list of all those deliverables and the dates. And when you look at these deliverables and dates from the project brief, you kind of draw a graph, and this is the Gantt-like graph of it. And you can see, if you're a project manager, that we're already under time pressure. We should be working on two things, and this is what we started very skeletally already. Capture and document Global Trust Registry governance requirements. So how might we think about running the Global Trust Registry and the other registrars? How do they do their stuff? And capture and document the kind of digital identity anchor requirements. What we need to know about the entries inside global registries, and what sort of data formats or schemas can we think of that might enable interoperability. So those two things are the activities that we'll start with. Alina's already started drafting some of the framework documents for the governance area. We're going to put these into our project folder, and the idea is all the contributors that sign up to and want to can be part of the process of helping us draft those and capture those and do the work for those more effectively than just Alina and I. The trouble with the schedule for me is it looks very deterministic, a little challenging, and a bit waterfall-like. And I kind of think we're going to get more like a sort of iterative life cycle process. This is a design thinking life cycle, which I kind of like. And design thinking has a similar sort of understand, define, guide kind of way of thinking about things, which tends to make me feel that we're probably going to have a bit more like this experience on the project. So we think it's going to be simple. In fact, yesterday, Steve Capel, who's the vice chair of the UN CEFACT Bureau and the promoter of this project and leading the UNTP project, had the cheeky audacity to say, it should be simple, John. And I'm thinking, I'm not so sure, Steve. But anyway, so we'll get through it. There'll be lots of stuff we find out that'll be really quite interesting, I'm sure, and quite challenging. And then we'll hopefully get to the other side and get to simple again. And as I jokingly used an old phrase, we should just remember to keep calm and carry on. And then there's the last thing, this is the last slide before I sort of do the questioning bit, is we have to sort of get going with some infrastructure and some tools. Now, one of the things about the UN CEFACT projects, several things. One is that contributors shouldn't need to pay any money to participate. There shouldn't need to be you don't need to buy licenses. You shouldn't need to sort of run infrastructure. So they do have a form of infrastructure, sort of Atlassian Jira sort of based infrastructure, but it's not very easy to use, and it's a little fragile. And the other projects that are working like UNTP are very firmly based in GitHub, and they've got a very good reason for that. And there's a number of projects under UN CEFACT that are based in the GitHub repos. But for a lot of authors of written documents, GitHub presents a somewhat of a learning curve. So the idea of I want to edit a document, so I need to fork and do a pull request becomes a little bit sort of unfamiliar, right? So we feel we might need to go simple before we go complicated or more powerful, perhaps. So the kind of things we're thinking about are we're going to start with Google. The reason we can start with Google is that because of what Joe and I do, we can share documents and make spaces available for free to participants, and at no extra cost to us, I hasten to add. So that we'll go there to start with, and we may move from there to other places, but we'll start there at least at the beginning. Now that is the end of the presented content. So Anne and Tom, please do ask other questions if you have them.
Yeah, so a couple of questions. So first, the logistic of participating.
Mhm.
I cannot recall if I actually have ever signed up to be an expert, though I have been contributing to UNTP without having to do that. So I have to check with this. So while we're waiting for that to sort out, how could we just started to contribute if there's anything to do, or do we
Yeah,
need?
I have no, yes. For me, the answer is going to be yes, right? But I think I do have to honor, respect, I suppose, the rules under which I'm being told I need to work. And the main thing that Steve has told me about the application process is by applying, you recognize the intellectual property requirements. And and if you've worked with Trust over IP, or you work with other sort of open standards development and thinking groups, that's a fairly common requirement, that you kind of have to sign up to something to sort of prove that you recognize the IP is going to be owned by, you know, the public, by an open standards sort of process. So that's only, I can check, Anne. I've got and so can Joe, actually. If you've registered as an expert, you get a kind of a way of looking for other experts. So I can kind of do a search to see if your name's in there already. But I guess have a look to see if
I can double check to see if I have registered or not, but I could always do that. So,
Yeah.
and you said it take a couple weeks, right?
Yeah. So what I would encourage you to do, and you too, Tom, if you want to, is if you do apply, tell me you've applied. Send me an email to say, look, I've applied. And what that means I can do is, if it takes a long time, I can ask the secretariat, because I don't personally see these applications, they can check to see where the application is, and maybe touch the head of a delegation on the shoulder and say, can you please check this? Or they can even, I think, accelerate the process themselves. But it's sort of it's not, I can't see these applications. I don't get to see the form completions and stuff. So if you tell me you've done it and say what email address you used in the application process, then that'll help me follow up if necessary.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so back to a bit of a more technical question. So it looks to me here, this slightly different in UNTP in the sense that here you need to take into account a lot of legal context to analyze it. Do we foresee a lot of difficulties in terms not just
Google diagram? Yes and no, right? Yes, of course. The complexity exists, right? There's no doubt about that. The idea of trying to get some sort of universal law and recognition, that's like let's have another boil the ocean kind of project. So what I think is possible is to recognize some key elements of what the legal infrastructure of that jurisdiction provides. So if you imagine what we're back to my overly simplistic argument about, I'm drinking a bottle of supposedly Spanish beer and I want to know whether it's in fact a bottle from a Spanish company or a beer from a Spanish company. So when I look up and find this company claims to be Spanish, I now find that the place to find out about Spanish companies is Registradores. Now, it could just be as simple as a sort of a pointer to their website, or it could be like some sort of automated process where I can do some linked data extraction and resolve and find things out. My little app does stuff for me. But what we're talking about here is, what does it mean to be registered as a company in Spain? What is the legal meaning of a Spanish company? What protections does it give customers? What duties does it make the company have to comply with, and so on? And that's where the detail really matters, and it's enormously complicated because every country is different. So we're going to gradually go through, here's where you can find out more. So then in this project, perhaps saying a bit more about what that country does for company registration or land registration. So go from, if you like, being a directory towards becoming more of a dictionary and a thesaurus. Like, okay, this is where you find out more about Spanish companies, to this is what it means to be a Spanish company. But the process of gathering that sort of dilute, that concentrated view about what it means and what the law provides for in that country, that's where like angels fear to tread kind of territory for me. That gets to the very complicated space. So I have a more humble ambition to start with, which is just recognize where you find authoritative data about this place, this jurisdiction.
And we aiming for as many regions and countries as possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Oh dear, it's it won't be. Well, but the EU actually trying to harmonize it, and I think they are going toward the directions of having the identity wallets. So that could reduce a little bit of work.
Pointing that gives you 29 countries in one fell swoop, in a sense. But yes, it sort of does. But the challenge remains, right? And it's a pull, not a push. The UN has no authority to tell any other country what to do. It doesn't have any of that kind of capability. So this is all an opt-in kind of thing, right? And therefore, there needs to be a strong commercial kind of general good argument about why you might want to do that. And I think again, no matter kind of your kind of current thinking about the state of the nations and world, that the idea of finding trustworthy data to support some claims is a sort of fundamental requirement for trust. So that's what this is about. It's not about telling people how to do things. It's about finding out where you can find out information.
And one last question. So in the outcomes or the deliverables, I presume that you were mentioning governance principles and that. Are you touching on specific standards or any kind of technologies?
I'm a part of the Trust over IP governance working group, and I've been looking after the governance architecture task force for a few years. So I've got an understanding and awareness of the meta model for governance that Trust over IP developed. It was used for GLIFE and used for a number of other implementations now. So that's a place to look if we're looking at that sort of thing. But in fact, the governance we're talking about here isn't necessarily that's a governance framework we might promote towards registrars that they might consider using for their issuance of credentials. The other governance we need to think about is what does the UN CEFACT body do if there is such a thing as the Global Trust Registry? What's its governance of the Global Trust Registry? Who decides whether or not a country's registration process can be recognized? What's the process of recognition, and how do we govern that process? So when we get into that space, we've got a legacy, a platform, a foundation to build on, because the UN has lots of governance stuff. So I need to be kind of sensitive to that existing fabric about governance inside the UN and inside UN CEFACT, and then ask questions about, well, how does that work for this project? Can we learn from ICAO, for example, with passports? Can we learn from low code? Can we learn from there are a number of other projects in the UN which have similar profiles to this. So how do we learn from those and not reinvent any wheels? But yes, for me, there are at least two types of governance frameworks that we're thinking about here. Promoting to how a registrar might do their stuff, but again, it's a recommendation, a template, a meta model, whatever you want to call it. They decide themselves, and then we decide how we would run our own stuff inside UN CEFACT for the Global Trust Registry.
Perfect, thank you. It's much clearer.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I promised actually in these meetings to try to make them only 50 minutes long, because I kind of feel everybody starts the next meeting at the top of an hour. And if you go back to back, you've got no time to do anything between meetings. So my aim is to do that. The other things that happen are this recording and transcript and the minutes of this meeting will be publicly available, not just for you two and Tom and Joe, of course, but for anybody that wants to look at them. We're planning to run these every 2 weeks. So the meetings would be every 2 weeks, but the work would continue between the meetings. So I'm going to be setting up a group for email. You'll both get invitations to that group, but a group for email correspondence. Steve Capel suggested setting up a Slack channel as well. We have a Slack channel for UNTP. I've been thinking about that this morning and realizing that the more channels I have, the less likely it is I spot something of importance on one of them. So I'm not sure I want multiple channels, but I get straw poll. Tom and Anne, what do you think about having both Slack and a group email? Do you think we should just go for one thing and not two things?
Well, I already have all those things, so I don't know that it matters.
You've already got the multi-channel problem. Yeah.
Everybody uses all those already.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we are living with it already, aren't we?
But I would say let's just maybe focus on one, because otherwise it was way too many. And I agree, we may miss something important.
Slack would be better than.
Interesting, Tom. I was going to go the other way. Go figure. You know, the reason I was going to go the other way is that Slack, people have been using email since what, 1996. And people are using Slack since, I don't know, more recently than that. And not everybody's using Slack. And some people now want to use Discord and so on. So it's sort of fragmenting away. And it's like a lowest common denominator. It's not very good, but everyone's got it. It's got
Well, the advantage of email is permanent and Slack isn't.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, or you could say the advantage of Slack is that things aren't permanent if you're of that mind. But okay, I'll think about it for a while. But so we're going to set up certainly ways to talk between the meetings. We're going to have shared collaborative document exchange and so on that people can kind of contribute to. I will, if you've got the links to the CEFACT registration process.
The thing that you suggested is a thing that's called a registration link. That's what you were suggesting.
Yes. Do you want me to? Have you found that, Tom? Do you want me to show it to you?
I've already shared it, John.
Okay, cool. Yes, in the chat.
It's in the Slack channel.
That's what I was looking at. I was looking at.
Yeah.
Joe's.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, that's the link. Now, one of the reasons I want to use our own infrastructure is that we found that Q, as it's called, the Collaboration United Nations Environment or something, CUE, sometimes isn't available. It's got a bit of a flaky availability. So that form is available 80% of the time, but not 100. And so is the rest. So fill it out if it's there, and it'll set off the email, and then we'll be fine. But sometimes that form doesn't seem to be available. So yes, fill it out, please. Send me an email to say you've done it, and whatever email address you use, and let's hope in less than 2 weeks' time you're in.
And I do things the other way around. I build them first and then see if I can get them approved later.
I do appreciate that one as well, Tom. For me, so back to what Steve was saying, if you've applied, then as part of the application process, I think there's a sort of recognition of the intellectual property rights sort of thing. And then Steve said to me, that's sufficient from his point of view. So I am with you, Tom. I kind of want to go towards the let's do some good things and then decide whether we follow due process later.
I already own trustregistry.us and trustregistry.org.
And I'm sure they suffice, for a different. So I'm not competing with your space, Tom. Don't worry. We're not going to create a new domain or URL.
So I'll
maybe
just
GTR will actually enable trustregistry.us.
Maybe.
Yeah.
If there were something that I could put in there that would improve the demonstration of this thing, that would be interesting for me to know.
Okay, cool. Well, let's bear that in mind. I'm very keen to anything
So
we
if
can do.
you have the sort of "can you do this" sort of message, you could send that to me.
Cool. Okay, well, I'll stop the recording now if you like, because everything we said so far is on the recording, which is fine. And
all right, thanks, guys.